Hi, welcome to my Psychic Manifesto. I'm your host, Ian Peckrell. This is a program dedicated to exploring higher consciousness through the work of Jane Roberts and a body of information known as the SETH material. It's with great pleasure today I introduce our guest, Alexandra Andrianova. Alexandria is the founder of the SETH Experience Facebook group. She's also the author of this amazing book, My Poetry, Complete and Exact Oxymoronic Webs of Concrete Paradoxical Inexactitude. Alexandra is also the incredibly talented artist who drew our logo with the black sheep and the gold triangle. Alexandria, welcome to my Psychic Manifesto.
Thank you for having me, Ian.
All right, great. Well, first, let's get right into it. How did you become interested in metaphysics, and how did you find Seth?
Well, as a kid, I was generally a metaphysically inclined child. My father, when I was very small, he would read such books to me as Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Bach and The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho and Stefan Zweig, and probably Hess was thrown in there as well. So I kind of grew up on it, and I've always been fascinated with metaphysics. But it was really around my Saturn return when I was 29 that I started to deeply seek to know myself. And I felt it was very, very important. And I was ready to start that journey. And I found a wonderful metaphysical bookshop called Stargazers here in Bellevue, Washington. And they offered classes, amazing classes like tarot, astrology, numerology, shamanic journeying, Reiki healing, dream study, spoon bending, work with crystals, things like that. And I took all of them. I just ate it up. I loved it. It was such a wonderful experience. And at one point, one of my teachers mentioned Seth. Have you heard of the Seth books? Have you read Seth? And I had no idea what that was about. So I looked into it, and about a week later, I had this beautiful book at my disposal, the Seth material. And it was on November 8th, 2019 that I first opened its pages and started reading it. And it was life-changing. I mean, at the time, right before I found the Seth material, I was reading books like Michael Talbot's Beyond the Quantum, Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief, Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, Madame Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled, and finally the Raw Material, Law of One, which was what I was reading right before Seth, and I had quite the love affair with that one. But Seth was it. Seth was the greatest stuff on earth that I found, and I'm very happy that I found it.
Well, what is it about the Seth material that really resonated with you? It's interesting. You would also, before you answer that, it's also interesting that your father, as you were growing up, one of the books he would read was Jonathan Livingston Seagull, because Richard Bach was actually, I don't know, he knew Jane Roberts and attended some of the sessions when she was dictating the nature of personal reality. So it's kind of cool through through reading his book, a lot of people have already been exposed to a lot of the ideas in the Seth material. And channeling, he basically wrote that book in a channeled state. So, but again, what is it that really resonated with you about the Seth material? Why'd you gravitate to it the way you have?
For me, you can feel when you read his words and the kinds of topics that he talks about, I can feel the truth of it in my cells. So it's just like, I have this quote, Seth is not an ideology you bow down to. Seth is whispers of your soul's self. And that's what it feels like to me. So that's it for me. And then another fun little fact, about a year into reading the Seth material, I found out that in the early 80s, my dad read this book before I was born in Ukraine in Russian, which is amazing. I had no idea. So that was already in my dad's mind and probably picked up on that telepathically. But yeah, it's like I always knew it. It's like what I know inside, it's said in the Seth material.
Yeah, her books have been translated in almost every language, but yeah, she didn't have a huge following back in the 80s. That's pretty cool that your dad, was it Ukraine or Russia that you read it? In Ukraine? Okay, cool. Well, what was, you founded one of the most active and popular Facebook groups, around based on the Seth material, which is called the SETH Experience. And I'd like to take a look at some of your memes in a little bit that you are so, excellent at. What was your motivation for founding the SETH Experience? Why did you want to put so much? You put a lot of your time and energy and artistic abilities into, you pour it into the SETH Experience. What was your motivation for that?
Well, I was following my impulses. I had a desire to share this with everyone who cared to listen. I wanted to show it to the whole world. And I also wanted to see how well I could get along with my fellow people, because for me in the past, that had not been my strong suit. So it's kind of on embarking upon consciously creating my own reality and interacting with other individuals. That was a big one for me. And I wanted to do my part in my corner of the universe. I wanted to raise the vibrational frequency of the earth and to help and do my part to help. And also, there's a very personal reason why I started the SETH Experience. On top of all of that, basically in the beginning, my husband, he was not really vibing with the material, and he had a really hard time with the you create your own reality concept, and he didn't particularly enjoy the reading of it. It just kind of blew his mind. And I would ask him, like, do you understand that you create your own reality? And he would say, yeah, to an extent. And we would have so many discussions about that. And he always reads everything that I post on Facebook. So that was another motivational thing, that every night I can bring these Seth gems, these amazing passages to the people. And then I knew that he would have to read it. And so it kind of...
I've been very active in, the only reason I kind of ignored social media for the most part up till like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I got interested in Facebook just because it was to interact with people around the SETH material. It was so hard. I've always been into yoga and more traditional New Age things like tarot cards or other ideas like extrasensory perception, telepathy, things like that, which are. But there's not a lot of people interested in the SETH material. My understanding, I would go into Barnes and Nobles, and there would be maybe 30, 40 books by Esther Hicks with the Abraham material, and maybe like 1 or 2 copies of a book by Jane Roberts in their trance channeling section. And Jane Roberts really started off a whole genre of trance channeling with her SETH material. She was way ahead of her time. But that's one of the reasons I gravitated towards Facebook, was to interact with. There were so many. It was hard. Even I was living in New York City at the time, and even in an area like New York, Rick Stack would hold some workshops through New Awareness, and people would come from all over for those. But it was still hard to find people on a day-to-day basis that were on the same wavelengths with the SETH material. Not that everyone needs it, but that was my motivation for going to Facebook too. Yeah, and that was a great way to get you to interact with people. I have formed some very healthy relationships with people. My executive producer, Tom, who was on the first couple of episodes, and yeah, meeting people like you, Barry Gellis, a lot of people. There's a pretty healthy SETH community on social media, primarily Facebook. But yeah, very cool.
And also I would add another reason for doing the Seth experience is Jane, Seth, and Rob are my heroes. So I celebrate them and I help spread this information.
Yeah, they were so, and what you were talking about, your husband being, a lot of this is, it's kind of the difference between the Seth material is I've mentioned on the first couple shows that there's a lot of assembly required and a lot of heavy lifting required on the part of the reader. And there are no, there aren't prepackaged answers, and the idea is really, Seth is constantly turning, it's the idea of self-empowerment and hope, but really turning that ultimate authority back to the reader. You're not putting any, other entity, and even Seth, like Jane Roberts wasn't trying to replace one set of dogma with Seth's dogma. Seth didn't have any dogma. The whole idea was that of personal empowerment. And we're creating our own reality. The next episode we're going to do is based on one of the most important tenets in the Seth material, YCYOR. You create your own reality. And that's really the backbone of the material. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, it's a big responsibility to assume the role of a conscious co-creator, and that's something we'll be exploring, later on in this episode. And that's one of the main themes of the Seth material: is the point of power is in the present. You create your own reality. So that was your.
I would also mention one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yes, the reason it was so important that he had to be on board with this is because Seth introduces almost like a new language, like a glossary of terms. For example, F1 and F2, framework 1 being outer reality, framework 2 being inner reality. Mm-hmm. And we Sethians, we speak this language to each other, and it had to be so that he was on board. I mean, we don't have to always be on the same page, and we don't have to be reading the same book, so to speak, but we have to be in the same library. I mean, so yeah, that was also very important to me.
Yeah, and that was part of its charm. There are some important differences. We had Barry Gellis on the episode a few episodes ago, and he spoke about some of the primary differences in the Seth material. Seth talks about things like reincarnation, but he also talks about them from the angle of like simultaneous time. Like he doesn't believe, according to Seth, karma doesn't really exist as a set of checks and balances. Unlike the Christian or Buddhist idea that the ego is something that needs to be destroyed, desires. There's a lot of those differences make the Seth material important. Its approach to ideas like guilt, or the idea of artificial guilt and sin. Yeah, there's a lot of, and it is there's a lot of jargon. That's the way he uses words is unique. But yeah, like framework 1, framework 2. All right, so that was, there were a couple other things where, so could you tell us a little bit about, I know this was something you posted about on Facebook when it happened. Could you tell us a little bit about your you had an out-of-body experience in OBE? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Okay, so this was in late October of 2020 that it happened. Didn't plan on it. It was completely spontaneous. I wasn't looking to have an out-of-body experience, or as Seth calls it, projection. What had happened was that evening we received some tragic news. My husband's nephew was killed. He was riding in ATV with his girlfriend, and someone blew a stop sign and snapped his neck, and he passed instantly. May he fly in peace. When I received that news, to my system, it was a complete and utter psychic shock. I mean, I was in shock. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to react. So I went to Seth, and I started reading passages from Seth to kind of help me get through this moment in my life, as I often do. And I'm sitting on the couch in my living room. I'm reading a Seth passage on my phone. And all of a sudden, I realized that I'm somewhere else. I'm in a different room. In this room, I'm not in a body. I know that there are people around, and the main person is Jane speaking as Seth. And like I said, I didn't have a body. I felt like I was in the voice. I felt like I was everywhere at once. I had no recollection of who I am in this lifetime at that moment. And this happened in a split second. It was very, very quick. And it was intense. There was an intensity about it. There was a lot of feeling and emotion. And the way Jane was speaking as Seth, there was an intent about it. It was very, very powerful. It was a visceral experience. It was vivid. And again, this happened in just a blink of an eye. And I realized I am not I'm on my couch, but I'm somewhere else. And the shock of that realization snapped me back to where I was sitting on my couch and reading those passages. But there was something about reading those words, and almost like I entered into the words and I like projected from there. I don't know how else to describe it, explain it. It happened. It did not feel like a daydream or an imagination. And you know, the funny thing is how we can miss something like that. Because if I hadn't been consciously paying attention or aware that such a thing is even possible as projection, we could be having these constantly and be just not even registering them on a conscious level. So that was another interesting thing. But yeah, I snapped back and there I was on the couch reading the Seth passage.
Well, according to Seth, we are constantly having those out-of-body experiences. And the idea was, like, you know, on episodes 3 and 4, when I had Tom on, you know, we spoke about the idea is, you know, with some discipline and some training and the right amount of, you know, motivation, these experiences can be had consciously. But, you know, as you mentioned, you know, they are happening on a regular basis. It's just becoming aware of them, open to the idea that they can happen, that they do happen. And then, wow, so how long do you think the whole episode took?
Maybe 3 seconds. But in that space, I wouldn't say that time and space was the same. So on my end here, on, you know, doing this earthly life, it was maybe 3 seconds, something like that. But it was different while I was inside there. It was different rules. And I have some a few Seth quotes that I wanted to read.
Yeah, go ahead.
On OBEs.
Please.
He says, you remember that I listed briefly the 3 forms used during projections. In the first form, you usually use certain inner senses. In the second form, you use more of these. And in the third form, you attempt to use all of them, though very rarely is this successful. In the third form, you will no longer be aware of the physical body, and you will not see it. In the third form, your experiences will be most vivid. They may involve you in other systems beside your own, and you will have little contact with the physical environment. So that's...
Where was that from? Was that one of the early sessions?
Sorry. That's from session 268, June 15th, 1966. So fairly early, yeah.
Okay, cool.
And then one more, Seth states, projections involve many more aspects of the whole self and are a mark that the personality is progressing in important ways. The inner senses are allowed their greatest freedom in projection states, and the whole self retains experience that it would not otherwise. And this is from session 274, book 6 of the early sessions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the second quote is an important one. And you know, when Seth is saying projections, he's talking about just for any of our viewers, he's talking about projections of consciousness. And he's also, right, like I like the idea that that is an important stage in development when someone's able to consciously have these out-of-body experiences, you know, which can go from lucid dreaming to a full-blown out-of-body experience too. There was one other thing I think we wanted to cover, and there is a Seth movie. You had the idea of a Seth movie. I know on one of your posts you had a great picture of you with your braids and you know, a Seth movie with Jim Carrey.
Yes, maybe we can place it here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I drew this a picture of Jim Carrey and me on a movie poster because I am manifesting an incredible Seth movie because it does not exist yet, and the world needs to know about this because it's so amazing, it's so life-altering, and it's wonderful material. And Jim Carrey, I just have a connection with him, and he has the heart and he has the understanding in his heart to do this, to make this movie, I believe. That's what I see anyway, and I would love to be in it with him. But it has to be done well. It has to be done right with the integrity of the material preserved by people who understand the material. And yeah, so I think about it for a while and then I drop it into framework too, like a pebble, as Seth says. So thank you so much for sharing it on your show and helping manifest my dream.
Sure. You know, we've still got a few minutes left. Do you want to talk about, to you, could you describe a little bit the difference? We've mentioned it a couple times briefly on the show. When you say framework two, like what do you mean when you say dropping? What's, first off, to give us a brief, a Reader's Digest version of the difference between what is framework one and what is framework two, the difference between them, how they relate. Can you talk about those two for a little bit?
Framework one is the outer reality, what you see out here. Framework two is what you whisper to yourself. It's the inner reality that many of us are sadly not really even in touch with. And it's so important because everything springs from framework two. Everything springs from our inner reality. And it's important to be mindful of it and to understand what it is.
Cool. One last thing. I think we're going to leave the last couple minutes. We'll play some of your memes. But do you have, rumor has it, you have a parrot that can make spaceship noises. Do you have, is he handy?
Yes.
Yeah?
Just one moment.
All right.
Tyler, I'm going to need Woodstock now.
So is Tyler warmed up to the Seth material a little bit more since you first started reading it?
Yes, he's integrating it in his own way. The other month, he dropped F2 casually in conversation, and I almost shed a tear. It's like, you're integrating this in your own way, and I'm so happy. And that's all I ever wanted, because he had such issues with the whole we create objects and everything we create for ourselves and the glass scenario.
Well, it might have been with a lot of these books your dad was reading to you as a kid, but I've read most of your book here. Oh, there he is. Hey, Woodstock. Yeah, no, you had already, I think, had some of the main tenets of the Seth material, like just reading some of your poetry here, but wow. This is Woodstock?
This is Woodstock. Step up.
All right.
Woodstock, can you do an alien spaceship?
That's awesome. All right. Alexandra, thank you so much for being on the show. Alexandra is going to be on our next episode, so this is a two-parter. Yeah, I would also like to remind our viewers that My Psychic Manifesto is now a YouTube channel, as well as airing on TV Santa Barbara. It's My Psychic. If you just Google My Psychic Manifesto, or it's a tiny CC, My Psychic Manifesto. So Alexandria, thank you so much for being on the show. Look forward to having you back in a few minutes. And these are this is a preview of what you'll get if you go to Facebook. Alexandra's group is just put in the SETH Experience, and it's a Facebook group. I think there's a couple questions people have to answer to get on. Is there, Alexandra, if somebody wanted to join your group on Facebook, how does that work? Is there, like, do they have to answer a couple of questions?
They would just click join. It used to be that we had questions, but because it's a public group, which I intend on keeping it public, because I
Okay,
feel that's important. That's my personal choice. They don't have to answer any questions anymore.
okay. I know some of them have a couple questions to see, they wanted you to at least know something about the Seth material, but great.
That's
Well,
how I had it at first, yeah.
all right, great. Thank you so much for being on the show. We look forward to having you back. Thank you for introducing us to Woodstock, your bird, and yeah, well, the experiment continues. Thank you to all our viewers.
Whisper in the darkness as the December sun goes down. Breeze blowing around your feet as you stumble from the ground. The secret in the moving dust. Know why your heart still beats. The stairs leading from the house onto the sacred street.